Hi, my name is Anna Dang.
My name is Elizabeth Hong.
Hi, my name is Joseph Gonzalez.
My name is Michael Ramos. Jack the Ripper was a notorious serial killer in the 1880s. He claimed the life of 5 women, although it is believed he killed more. The 5 victims were Mary Ann Nicholas, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Edwards, and Mary Jane Kelly. When they were discovered, the victims had their throats slashed and their bodies mutilated. It is believed that the killer had extensive knowledge of human anatomy.
Although the murderer was never identified, there were many suspects in the case, all of whom were criminals or had a history of mental health problems. The most notable suspect is Aaron Kaminsky, who was recently tied to the case by the analysis of mitochondrial DNA. In the field of forensics, short tandem repeats, STRs, and mitochondrial DNA can be used for analysis. STRs are very useful to scientists because there are hundreds of them in human genes. They can also be multiplied and amplified using polymerase chain reaction, PCR, a technique used to copy and multiply specific DNA strands. The more STRs characterized, the easier the identification of a person can be. STRs are usually analyzed by separating them through electrophoresis, where they then move through gel. The distance each DNA segment moves is then analyzed. Mitochondrial DNA is from the mitochondria, organelles that provide energy to the cell of the body. In the field of forensics, mitochondrial DNA is valuable, as it can be recovered from ancient skeletal remains or even highly degraded samples. Mitochondrial DNA can only be passed down from mother to child. Should there be no DNA sample from the suspect, a reference sample can be used from any relative with the same maternal lineage. This is especially useful when the suspect or victims have passed away and are unable to provide DNA for forensic scientists. A limitation for mitochondrial DNA analysis is that individuals with the same maternal lineage will almost always have the same sequencing. This means that we would not be able to clearly distinguish one person from another. On the other hand, with enough STRs to make a full analysis, we can further close in on a suspect.
In the case of Jack the Ripper, a shawl with stands on it has recently been tied to the case claimed to be found on the 4th victim, Catherine Edwards. Using infrared imagery, spectrophotometry, and several microscope analysis, researchers were able to conclude the stains were blood and one stain was semen. The blood was a match with a relative of Catherine Edwards, and the semen was found to have one mtDNA sequence that matched with the mtDNA sequence from a relative of Aaron Kaminsky. This finding led many people to believe that Kaminsky was a murderer. However, the reality is that there is not enough evidence to prove he did it. This is why there is not enough evidence to confidently say Kaminsky was Jack the Ripper. There were additional problems with the case, including unreported error rates, confirmation bias, and suspect-based focus. The public and investigators alike insist on giving the Ripper an identity. They place more focus on suspects rather than focusing on the case evidence. There are also problems with how the shawl was handled. Authorities failed to include the shawls in the original investigation reports and only brought into light when Russell Edwards, an enthusiast on the Ripper case, took it to authorities. Kim Rosmo is a Canadian criminologist who took into account the various mistakes made in reasoning and logic and that other investigators often overlook when analyzing DNA. The origin of the shawl still provoked a lot of questions. Was the shawl ever touched or picked up by someone else? How can we indicate the authenticity of it? There cannot be much scientific evidence that can be proven as a fact.
This could be seen as a major error because they have failed to connect the mitochondrial DNA to the main suspect, which resulted in lives being lost in vain. Furthermore, it is not clear regarding the identity of the true killer. The injustice behind those involved in this tragedy was never resolved, and there are still controversies about who the actual suspect is. From a particular commentary on the case, in reality, the task of identifying Jack the Ripper is nearly impossible due to the long 131-year interval. The efforts of solving the case in modern times are generally limited to trying to establish direct or indirect connections between a possible candidate, who is suspected of being him, and Jack the Ripper's crimes, victims, and/or locations. In worst-case scenarios, a prime error would be to wrongfully accuse people and make unjust convictions. Regarding the limitations, there was also a lack of modern technology since they were not up to date compared to the ones found in modern society today. This included the limited methods and approaches of techniques that would be helpful for fingerprint testing and blood typing. A copy of his handwriting to compare the handwriting that was found on the letter. Additionally, although there was a person's DNA analyzed on a letter, it does not indicate that they wrote the letter with their own hand. Handwritings can be easily forged, which makes this piece of evidence faulty and inaccurate to utilize in determining the suspect's identity. That is all. Thank you for listening.